Our first speaker, Cameron Watt, is the president and CEO of Intouch Insight, Inc. Having worked in a breadth of industries and roles, including the restaurant and convenience store business, Cameron consistently provides a 360-degree perspective on operational excellence. Please help me welcome Cameron Watt. Hi, Cameron. How's it doing this morning? How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Happy to be here.
We're glad to have you here, that's for sure. Well, before you take the stage by yourself, let me just ask you a question. You know, we've been, as a magazine, CSP Magazine, and Intouch Insight, we've partnered together for over 12 years now.
We have.
To cover C-store mystery shop results and operational excellence. Well, we find that benchmarking is such a value for operators, isn't it? Things have really changed, though, since we started. So with the world of apps, there's an app thrown at you all the time. How does the mystery shop fit in that?
Yeah, apps. I'm sure nobody has any on their phones out there, or
of course not.
Not even one for the conference. You know, it's funny. There's apps out there that actually do mystery shopping now automatically. Things like Field Agent, GigWalk. There are apps that companies can self-serve, and they can go out and they can actually use. There are different types of servers. They're not quite as robust, but you can use them. What we found as in general customer experience measurement industry is that the millennials are what's driving things, because baby boomers are willing to do a certain amount of things for work. They're willing to take a certain number of steps before they get paid. Millennials don't have the same number of steps.
They just want to go right to the end and get the results.
They might have a step, but that's about as close as it gets. So we've actually have to use now a mobile app ourselves to engage any new independent contractors and shoppers, because if it isn't on their phone or their tablet, if they can't do it and do it immediately and then get paid,
you may not have their attention.
You don't have their attention. So it's actually absolutely creeping into the world, whether it's seen by the clients or whether it's us using the back end. Mobility and application is the only way to deliver now.
Well, thank you for sharing that information with us. And why don't we get started?
Thanks.
It's all yours, Cameron.
Appreciate
Thank you.
So we're all up bright and early. This must be the crowd that was not at the after dark at 2 in the morning yesterday. I'm also told that I'm very happy not to be following the Modern Family guy, because apparently he was probably a lot funnier than me. So that's all good news for me. It's a good morning. I'm going to go through benchmark audit results. I'm going to go through the 2016 design, just so that everybody understands what it is. It is the same as the last couple of years, but I want to make sure everyone knows what we're doing. I am going to talk about the results, and then this year we did something different. We actually went out to the quick service restaurant industry, and we did a study, and then we did a direct comparison with the petro convenience industry and the quick service restaurant industry. So hopefully you'll find some value in that. You'll notice on the tables, actually, there is the printout of the study that we did this year as well. So what was the design of the program? Well, we had a combination of a overt audit, and we also did a micro mystery shop. The overt audit was a revealed audit. The micro mystery shop obviously was a covert activity. And for the overt audit, which is what primarily the study's based on, it was identical to what we did in 2014 and 2015. So there are apples to apples comparisons when you look at the scores across years as it relates to the study. From a methodology standpoint, the overt audit, what we do there is we do what we call an unannounced overt audit. That means we will show up at a location, in this case between 11:30 in the morning and 7:30 at night, any day of the week, and we did not tell the banners what day or what week or even what month. To a certain degree, it spanned a decent amount of time. We didn't tell them when we were coming. We didn't tell them which locations of theirs we were going to, so that therefore became unannounced and overt. The companies gave us a letter on their letterhead with a contact at the bottom, so that if our people showed up and said, "Hi, I'm just here, I'm going to check your milk temperatures and stuff," that they didn't get uncomfortable with that. And if they did, they could phone a number and their people would say, yeah, it's okay, they're allowed to come and do these checks. And we really appreciate that from our partners. And then at the end of the audit, we actually have the store personnel sign off on the audit, that it's accurate. So what you wind up with in the overt audit in that situation is you actually get 100% accuracy virtually, because someone in the location has signed off. If we found an expired sandwich in the cooler and shown it to somebody and they saw it, they signed off. So we can actually, the results are very, very accurate from that standpoint. The covert shop obviously is a little bit different. Covert, by its very nature, means you can't know I'm there, so you can't sign off on the results. But we wanted to do it because there are certain things you cannot measure in an unannounced overt audit, such as friendliness or suggestive selling, or whether or not somebody felt valued. In customer service intrinsic things you can't measure. And again, as I mentioned with Christy's question, we did use the mobile application to do this. People were just told to go out to the restaurant, have a normal experience, buy a meal, and then answer 5 questions. And it was very easy to do. It was done through their phones, and we got some very quick data from it. We did 715 different locations across 10 different companies for the Petro Convenience study. 21% of those locations actually had a perfect score on the overt audit. Now that's down from 29% last year, 25% the year before that. And you will see that, in fact, the scores are actually lower across the board this year. Now we went to check the 2 Quick Trips, I don't care how you spell it, and Cumberland Farms, and they were the same participants last year. So they were in it last year and in it this year. And then we added 7 new participants. So while the study itself and the methodology and what we did and how we did it is identical, we did in fact have 7 new participants. So 70% of the participants were new this year, which obviously explains some of the deviation and changes. We checked pump islands, exterior, interior, restrooms, employees. We checked the dairy cooler and coffee and sandwiches and fountain drinks. And each of these categories was not one question. There were several questions in each category to kind of get a score for the category. These are the brand. Oh, I pressed the back button. There's a back button on here, by the way. The results, which if you've seen the magazine, is Quick Trip with a K came first, Family Express was second, and then Quick Trip with a Q came third. Last year, the Quick Trips were actually inverted. They were opposite in terms of the results at the end of last year. And then somebody figured out the K came before Q in the alphabet, and so they got that worked out this year. What I find interesting, though, besides the overall score, is if you take a look at the blue line in the middle at 90.5, it's 2.5% lower on average than last year. But the deviation is a much different change. The high score to the low score in 2015 was almost 15% between the two. It's less than half of that in terms of a deviation this year. So what we saw this year was a much tighter grouping of the results, which says that there were the standardization-wise across those chains, it was fairly similar. This is an eye chart. You don't have to really read it. All you need to know is everything going to the left means it was worse than last year. Everything going to the right means it was better than last year. The blue line is 20 versus 2014. The red line is versus 2015. And you can see that employees were exactly the same, 2015, 2016. That interior was better than 2014, okay? All other sections were worse in the study. And in fact, restrooms were the worst result in general versus prior years. Cleanliness, you can see, we went check, besides the restrooms, we checked the garbage cans, fountain area, coffee drink, sandwich area, just kind of a general cleanliness score. And you can see that that's down. The relative position of the different things in where the cleanliness issues are stayed the same, but the actual overall score went down by actually 6.9% year over year with the study this year, which is a fairly significant drop in terms of overall cleanliness. From a food safety perspective, how do we do? Well, food safe temperatures obviously are the goal that we're trying to maintain, and we did hit them 88.5% of the time this year in the dairy cooler. While that's up 1.5% from last year, I would contend it's maybe a little lower than we'd like to see it. And remember, people are signing off on the results. This is not somebody using their own thermometer and making up numbers. The sandwich cooler did a little better. 95.3%, exactly the same as last year. And there is some good news that 99.1% of the time, the question of whether sandwich is appealing was answered yes. So it's interesting. We also had expired product in the dairy area. So for every 100 locations that we went to look for expired product, we had 7 of them had expired product in it, right, on the shelf, ready for sale. Now that's down 0.2% from last year, but it's still 7% of the locations had expired product. Sandwiches, right? How do we do in sandwiches? 5.3% expired, no change from last year, and slightly better than dairy. So I was thinking to myself that it's interesting that an industry that was virtually built in origins off of going to the corner store to buy milk, right, but is now competing for grocery and restaurant dollars and the overall food budget for a family, is actually doing a pretty good job on the sandwich side of things, and not nearly as well on the origins and the core of the dairy side of things from a food safety standards. So I find that kind of an interesting data point, I guess, from the side. So the big question, of course, is, oh, okay, this is great, not as good as last year, different participants, same study, accurate data, great. What does it mean, right? Do these trends or scores have anything to do with the success of my business? Well, the answer, and I'm not sure if you're going to like the answer, to be honest. That's right, it depends. You have to ask more questions. So we actually did a key driver analysis, okay? It's a bit of an eye chart. I'll walk you through it for a second. Key driver analysis is where we take one variable and we see which other variables were correlated, in other words, drove it. Which variables drove that result? And what items were correlated, in this case, was to, were you willing to recommend this location? So we wanted to see which questions, what data across both the overt and the covert study actually had a positive correlation and drove whether or not someone was willing to recommend that location to a friend, okay? On the left side, you see that's the importance scale, and across the bottom is the average score in the studies, okay? Obviously, number one was customer feeling valued. It's up there on the top. It is by far the most important one. You can see it's way at the top. The other variables were friendly cashier, appealing sandwiches, employees in uniform, coffee temperatures, and waiting in line that determined whether or not people were willing to recommend a location. They were all positively correlated, by the way, which means that as those scores went up, the willingness to recommend went up. There was no negative correlations in the study. One of the things that comes up here is that whole customer feeling value being so high, right? Is why is there nothing for cleanliness, for example? How can somebody ask me this? They said, how can you tell me this? Somebody walked into my location and they walked in and the bathroom was a complete and utter disaster. How can you tell me that's not going to affect their willingness to recommend, right? And the answer is, of course it will in that situation, right? But customers have a bias when they walk in your location. If you walk into a 2-star motel or you walk into a 5-star hotel, I guarantee you what makes you complain to the front desk will be different, right? If you walk into a 2-star motel with a 5-star hotel expectations, you'll spend your entire stay at the front desk discussing what they haven't got right, okay? It's no different in our operations. We set the baseline expectations, right? We have a brand. Most of your companies large enough, you've got brand teams, okay, that work on the concept of what do people expect when they walk in our front door. Well, once we set those baseline expectations, they may not be correlated anymore or register as correlated in a study. But you will be punished if you fail on those things that people are expecting to see, right? It's just assumed to be there, right? And yes, it's all about the employee, right? I'm not telling you anything you don't know, right? You make the customer feel valued and they will recommend you and therefore they will return. It's just that simple. Now, a lot of you are going, yeah, okay, we didn't need a study to know that. I knew that, right? I mean, come on, I know you got to make customer feel valued. I mean, we've been preaching that in my company for the last 20 years. Tell me something new. What I would challenge a lot of people with is how are you having your employees make people feel valued? As we go through the QSR study and comparisons, which is next, you'll see we look at things like friendly cashier and speed of service, right? Now, if somebody says, hi, welcome. Oh, no, I'm sorry, we don't have any of that today. We ran out. Well, thank you. Have a nice day. If they made eye contact and if they smiled and if they said the right parting remark and if they were friendly, they probably would tick every audit box. They'd probably get 100% on their mystery shop score and 100% on their audit score, right? But the customer didn't walk away from them happy, right, or valued or anything else. Value is a difficult thing. especially when you take a look across brands, because what might make someone feel valued in one banner might be very different than what makes them feel valued in another banner. And it may not be our corporate standards. They may not be right. One of the things I talk about often in the industry and in the food service industry as well is the concept of measure, change, and remeasure. If we're doing studies right now where we go out there and we do it every month or every quarter or even every year, and the goal of the study, nobody will admit to this as the goal, by the way, but the goal of the study becomes getting a PowerPoint presentation that can be given to the chief executive officer so that he can see the trends and the changes and whether there's an attaboy or whether we're going to get mad at a regional manager, right? I mean, if that's how the tooling is being used, then that's what you're going to get from the tooling. Whereas to answer the tough questions, you have to iterate, change, remeasure. And we started that this year with the process we're doing, and I'll show you kind of what we've done, and then I'll kind of talk where we have to go for next year, because it is iterative to get to the answers. The answers aren't easy to get to. So channel blurring, we talked about with QSR. I think we all know this. We're all fighting for the same food dollar as everybody else is, right? So we did the micro shop. We did the 5-question survey on all of on the food service industry as well on QSR. Obviously, we couldn't do the overt audit because it involves a whole nother level of partnership that we didn't have from this group. But we measured the same customer service attributes we did in Petro Convenience, pardon me. We measured wait time, cashier friendliness, suggestive selling, making the customer feel valued, and then obviously the customer's willingness to recommend that location. Who'd we check? They're up on the screen. I'm hoping there's at least one logo you recognize. We tried to do a couple things that you'd see. One that, after we got the results back, I wish we'd done Starbucks because they do some different things. It would have been interesting to see how that translated to value. Next year we'll think about that. But we did some pretty big names here, and we did 11 of them. So there's 21 banners between the Petro Convenience and QSR in the study. Overall good news, Petro Convenience for the win, right? We were 2.5% higher in this study versus those QSR competitors I just showed you, which I thought was pretty cool. On a question comparison, if you take a look, everything going down means that Petro Convenience was better. Everything going up means that QSR was better. And you can see that where QSR really shines relative to these 5 questions is the concept of suggestive selling, because Petro Convenience doesn't really suggestive sell in general. QSR kind of does in general, right? And I've heard probably 2 main themes that I hear from my Petro Convenience people that tell me why they don't suggestive sell. And by the way, I'm not saying whether you should or not, but the 2 reasons I hear why you shouldn't are that anything that slows down my speed of service, even by a nanosecond, just annoys my customers, and speed of service is the most important thing that I do, and that's what my customers expect from me. The second thing I hear is, well, I get the same customers. Sally comes in every morning at about the same time, and Nancy's usually the cashier. And if Nancy can't ask Sally, if she wants a lottery ticket every morning, it's going to just annoy my customers, and they're too regular, they're too frequent. I can't annoy them like that. And those are kind of the 2 arguments I hear. By the way, both are valid, maybe. And to answer whether that's valid or not, you'd have to do some more homework. And that homework would have to involve talking to your customers and understanding their expectations for you and what they need to feel valued. From a time in line perspective, that was probably the most interesting difference, okay? Obviously, the Petro Convenience industry is faster. In fact, at the bottom end, 5% of the Petro Convenience industry waited for 2 minutes or more. 16% of QSR waited for that long. It is obviously skewed, right? Now the next question, are we best in class, right? QSR held the top spot. So yes, Petro Convenience was overall the winner, but the top spot was QSR. 2 of the top 3 spots were QSR. Jimmy John's was actually the number 1 ranked. Quick Trip, which was our top 1 in the CSP study, and then Arby's came 3rd. So there is a large discrepancy amongst the QSR banners that we went to see. And you can see there's a much tighter distribution, as you called earlier, from the CSP study. So overall results kind of look like this. And I tried to use, except for one question, which I'll point out, I tried to use a consistent set of boxes. Top left box means they were the best. Bottom right box means they were the worst in terms of the question. You can see Jimmy John's was by themselves over 85%. Then you had Quick Trip, Arby's, a couple of other CSP participants, and then you can see it kind of filters down from there with a lot of the QSR falling in that below 75% range overall. One thing I'll mention is you notice that it says CSP and doesn't have a lot of logos. The reason that is, okay, is very, very simple. We respect the privacy very much of the people who agree to partner with us when we do this study. You know, we go in and we learn a lot about their operations. Again, we have the authority to go in with there to do some really deep measurements. And we only share what's public in that magazine. They get access at no charge, just for being a study participant. They get access to all of their individual data and all their comments and everything else that they can analyze. But we don't share their data outside of this study because of, you know, just respect confidentiality. However, on the QSR side, there was no partnership. I just went in there and asked a few questions as a private citizen, I guess. So we are putting their logos up, and you know, if they were in the room, they probably wouldn't be thrilled with it necessarily, unless you're doing really well. I think Subway's here, but they did really well, so we're okay. You'll notice I did a quick trip up. There was one other slide where I do show a logo from the CSP, and that's where somebody did very well. And my experience is if somebody did very well, they don't mind being called out. Waiting in line. We saw it earlier on the trend line, but you can see that the CSP study, the petro-convenience study, really was at the top end, kind of consistently running across from the top end, nothing really at the bottom. And the QSR is very much spread. Jimmy John's was in that 90%. They were up high. Arby's did well. Subway and Burger King did pretty well. But you can see most of them sit in that bottom quadrant in terms of that waiting in line. They have problems, frankly, with waiting in line. We also have friendly cashier. Now this one's interesting. It seems like everyone has a friendly cashier, right? We've got, look at the list on the left there. I mean, we've only got 3 QSR and CSP in the next band, and then poor old Tim Hortons over on the right. I should mention that that's Tim Hortons' U.S. operations we went to see. We didn't see any of their parent company in Canada. We didn't go see them in Canada. We only went to see them in the U.S. But it's amazing how much we lean to the left. But yet the very next question of valued customer doesn't look the same. So we have all of these really friendly, well-trained, corporate standard cashiers, right? And at the end of the day, you know, they're not making the customer feel valued through that process. Subway actually ranked the highest here. And then you've got one CSP member, and then you've got, you know, you can see from there it goes Panera, Jimmy John's, and Arby's, Chick-fil-A. You can kind of see how it goes. Now, nobody's below 75% is the good news, but you can see that it's really disconnected from the concept of friendly cashier. Suggestive sell. Now here, this is the one I talked about, change the scale. The reason I did change the scale was everybody would be in the lower right if I didn't. So it's a new scale for this one. But there's only 2 people that do it more than half the time. Then you've got a couple people that do it over 45% of the time. And then you've got a large group of QSR filling out the rest with one CSP participant, with pretty much the petro-convenience industry sitting at the bottom right. Because again, we talked about it. We don't suggestive sell and often don't believe in doing suggestive selling. What about will you recommend? So Cumberland Farms and Quick Trip, again, I use logos because I think this is a pretty cool result. They came out at the very top of the study at over 90%. And then you've got Arby's, Chick-fil-A, and I think a lot of people respect Chick-fil-A in terms of their, you know, a lot of people think they got it right when you go in and see them. They showed up in that top box with Panera. And then Jimmy John's, interestingly, is in the next one. And then you can see they kind of filter down from there. So, another eye chart, but I do need it just to kind of point out the so what's here. It is a key driver comparison, same as the last one. Left-hand side of each wasn't as important. Bottom is average score. On the left side is the petro-convenience study. On the right side is the QSR study. If you notice, okay, this only has now the variables from these 5 questions. So these 4 questions against the concept of will you recommend was what the R-squared analysis was done against. And that was because we didn't do an overt audit in the QSR, so we couldn't make the comparison. QSR asked for an additional sale 2 times as often, okay, twice as often. Do they get more sales because of it, higher revenue? Maybe, I don't know. Is it annoying their customers? According to this, it's not. According to this, look at the importance. It's almost 0. For both. It is positively correlated, by the way, when we did the analysis, which means that as suggestive selling went up, technically willingness to recommend went up. But such a small infinitesimal correlation, it's basically meant they don't care. They're not going to recommend or not recommend whether you suggest a sell or not. It's not bothering them. It's also not making them feel happy. Okay? So it's really just about revenue at that point in this study. Okay? Friendly cashiers. They're twice as important to people in petrol convenience. So I don't know if that's an indictment or a benefit to the QSR industry that they've managed to get the population to basically expect less. But petrol convenience, friendly is important. But even though it's twice as important as QSR, and it is important, look at how far below customer feeling valued it is. Customer feeling valued is way up there. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. That's the thing that people want to know about. And it's directly correlated to whether they'll come back. So where do we go from here, right? For any individual banner, okay, there's a whole pile of questions you can now ask to try to get the answers to how do my customers feel valued? What is it they expect from me? What's the baseline? What do I have to do to make them feel valued? Is my training right? Do I need to have more flexibility with people in my greetings, right? Is it okay that somebody compliments somebody's sweater when they come in? Or is that something you're never allowed to do because God forbid, you get politically incorrect when you're behind the till, right? And how do you get a genuine interaction, right? How do you genuinely make someone feel valued? And that answer is not going to be the same for every banner, every situation. The reason we don't have that next layer of data in here is that I couldn't do it by myself, because to get it and do it properly, you have to talk to the customer, right? There's lots of ways to do that, but you have to do that. So I've already talked to David Job about this, and we're talking next year about maybe expanding what we do a little bit to talk to some actual customers and see if we can't start tying the ribbing together. Because whenever you do studies, and this is how you should be doing them, and this is what I talked about with the iterative process, our study told us a few things we thought we knew. It showed us a few things that were, okay, I didn't really think that, or that's interesting, or that's not what I thought. And then it basically gives you a whole pile of questions you didn't have before. Well, now you got to go answer those questions, and there's ways to do it, but you got to go answer those questions. And once you get those answers, you can go measure and see how things are going, and then you're going to have more questions. And it's not going to stop, especially in the age of modern technology and change and movement that we're seeing, right? I mean, I think America's going to see a lot of change too in the next few years. Well, stay with it, because you're going to have to start measuring some data, right? With that, I think that I have time now to answer a few questions. I have one on the screen right now, which is, you showed how store cleanliness and bathroom cleanliness scores are down from last year. Are we spending too much time on food service and forgetting about the basics? Obviously, I can't answer that question directly about your operation, but if I look at the scores on aggregate, the answer would be yes. It does appear, in fact, as though we're not doing all of the basics. And now, are we focusing too much on food service? That I can't answer, because that would probably need more questions, right? But are we slipping on the basics? Yes, yeah, to a certain degree, we are slipping on the basics. Now, does it matter? Again, talk to your customers, right? At some point, it's going to. Are there any other questions there's no more on my screen, are there any from out in the audience?
Do you have any correlations between longevity of employees and the ratings of that store?
So that's a great question. His question was, is there any correlation between the tenure of an employee base in a store and the ratings of that store? The answer is we don't have it, because we haven't done that, but that's a great example of one of those questions that we ought to be going out and asking, right? That we should be figuring that out, which is, and it's not hard. That's just going to, in this case, the study participants just need to give us the tenure data, and then we could do it. So that's exactly the type of expansion that I'd like to see next year to get to some of those answers. Any other questions? All right, if there's no questions, I appreciate your time and listening to me early in the morning, and we'll let you get on to hopefully where one of you will win a big prize.
Thank you, Cameron. Thank you very much.